If you've ever been in the market for a new home, you know home shopping can be a lot. There's so much you don't know and so much you need to know. What are the neighborhoods like? What are the schools like? Who is the agent who knows the listing or neighborhood best? And why can't all this information just be in one place?
Well, now it is on Homes.com. They've got everything you need to know about the listing itself, but even better, they've got comprehensive neighborhood guides and detailed reports about local schools. And their agent directory helps you see the agent's current listings and sales history. Homes.com collaboration tools make it easier than ever to share all this information with your family. It's a whole cul-de-sac of home shopping information all at your fingertips. Homes.com. We've done your homework. Hello, we're here for More Happier, a podcast where we get more happier. Today, we're doing something a little different and sharing a conversation I had on the #1 parenting podcast in the country, Good Inside with Dr. Becky.
It's such a good podcast.
I had the privilege of joining Dr. Becky for a fascinating, in-depth conversation about the 4 tendencies and parenting. I introduce her to the 4 tendencies framework, and we discuss how it can help parents better understand their kids, their partners, and themselves, all in the service of happiness. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation.
Happy listening.
Happy listening.
I'm Dr. Becky, and this is Good Inside.
Once you see these patterns, you see them in the office. They're often very obvious with children at a very young age. Like they're really kind of easy to spot once you notice the pattern. And so what's great about that is that then you can harness that in order to achieve an aim, whether for yourself or for somebody else, instead of getting lost in this thing of like, well, one person's right or one person has the better way. It's like, well, we can all learn from each other, but maybe if this doesn't work for you, what are some other ways to try it?
Understanding people who are different from us, understanding our kids who are different from us is one of the hardest things in life. If you're like me, there's a certain way you go about the world. So for me, I tend to kind of like rules. I like knowing what's expected from me, and I have expectations for myself. And when people tell me, hey, I'd like you to do something, as long as it's reasonable, I'm happy to oblige. I'm actually happy to know what they expect. Well, I know I have a kid, and I have certain friends who are completely different. I'm like, why are you asking so many questions? It's not that complicated. And one of the things I recently unpacked was a new way to understand these differences, and it has been mind-blowingly helpful to me, and I can't wait to share it with you. Today on the pod, I'm talking to Gretchen Rubin. She's one of today's most influential and thought-provoking observers of happiness and human nature. She's the author of many New York Times bestselling books, and she hosts the Happier with Gretchen Rubin podcast. I can't wait for you to hear our discussion on the different tendencies people have and how to use that information in a very practical, helpful way in your real life. We'll be back right after this.
LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. I now work with a team, and I am here to say that finding the right candidate and hiring the right candidate is one of the very biggest and most important challenges to anyone who has a small business.
LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Gretchen. That's linkedin.com/Gretchen to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The weather's getting warmer, so it's time to say goodbye to jackets and sweaters and hello to shorts and tees. Gretchen, I am always on the hunt for the perfect t-shirt, and I found it at Quince. So well priced, such good quality. I am in love with the slub crew neck tee. I have it in white. I'm getting it in black, possibly multiples. I love it so much.
The best part, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the costs of the middleman and passes the savings on to us. Get warm weather ready with Quince. Go to quince.com/Gretchen for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/Gretchen to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Gretchen.
Hi, Gretchen. So good to have you on.
I'm so happy to have the chance to talk to you today. Thank you.
So you, I feel like, are someone who's always been pretty curious about human nature. And you've written about happiness a lot. And you've also written a book called 4 Tendencies, which speaks about these kind of 4 categories of how people orient to the world. And I'd love to focus on that because I have done your quiz. I am all in. I'm not going to tell you who I am yet. Maybe you can guess.
Because as I listen, I've been trying to figure out what you are. And I have to say, I'm not sure. So I'm truly in suspense. You're going to answer a question that's been pestering me. Okay. It's very exciting.
It is the ultimate cliffhanger. I know everyone is on their seat right now. What tendency is Becky? Okay. But actually, it's a perfect lead in. What are the 4 tendencies?
So I was writing a book called Better Than Before that was all about habit formation. And it gave me an insight into this narrow aspect of our nature, which turns out to be really, really important. And it's important for habits, but it's also really important for understanding our kids. It's really important for understanding ourselves, our coworkers, our spouses. And so, they say there are 2 kinds of people in the world, those that divide the world into 2 kinds of people and those that don't. I'm the kind that does. And this framework divides people into upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. So we'll talk about it like in a nutshell version, but if anybody wants to take a quiz and get a report, it's free. It's at GretchenRubin.com/quiz. But I think most people will know what they are and what their kids are just from this discussion. Okay. So what it looks at is how you meet expectations, how you respond to an expectation. And we all face 2 kinds of expectations. Outer expectations like a work deadline or writing a book report, and inner expectation like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution or your own desire to get better at diving. So depending on whether we meet or resist outer and inner expectations, that's what makes us an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. So when you look at someone who's an upholder, they readily meet outer and inner expectations. So these are the people who meet the school deadline and remember to pack their gym clothes without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. So their motto is, discipline is my freedom. So this is like Hermione Granger. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They do something if they think it makes sense. So they resist anything arbitrary, ineffective, unjustified, that doesn't have a purpose. They tend to love to customize. They're very focused on reason. So these are the people, you're like, you ask so many questions. Because what's happening is if it meets their inner standard, if it makes sense to them, they will do it no problem. But if it fails their inner standard, they'll push back. So their motto is, I'll comply if you convince me why. Then there are obligers. Obligers are people who readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I'll just say, this is the biggest tendency for both men and women. This is the biggest tendency. You either are an obliger, you have many obligers in your life. So these are people who are like, why can I keep my promises to other people, but I can't keep my promises to myself? These are people who are really good with external expectations, but when it comes to something that they want to do for themselves, they struggle. They're really great at going the extra mile for other people, but they they often become very frustrated with themselves. And the secret for them is to create outer accountability, even for something that's an inner expectation. And so their motto is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. And Becky, I have to say, I was thinking about the rebel tendency some episodes of yours ago because somebody was describing a child, and I'm like, that might be a rebel child. So rebels do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do, anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically they don't tell themselves what to do. They're like, I'm not going to sign up for a 10 a.m. swim class on Saturday because just the fact that somebody's going to expect me to show up is going to annoy me. And I don't know what I'm going to feel like doing on Saturday anyway. So their motto is, you can't make me, and neither can I. And then when you know these tendencies, it really can help you be a more effective parent and more effective at managing yourself because, I mean, and you talk about this all the time, people are different. And to manage ourselves, we have to know ourselves.
There's so many things I want to jump into. One of the things I love, and I love about your site, and I love the way you profile also other people, and you do this in the book, is you don't have like judgment. You're not like, everyone should be this.
Absolutely.
Like we have our tendencies. There are pros and cons. And
yes.
To me, actually, I often say this to friends, like my favorite adult friends are just the people who like know themselves and they can kind of have levity with themselves.
Yes.
They can talk about that.
Yes.
Like, obviously, I believe we can change, but to some degree, it's like, hey, this is me. And I'm also curious about myself and non-defensive, but I love that your book takes that approach, which for everyone listening, you should know there's like no shame. Like you will actually just be like, wow, this is really useful as a framework and then set of strategies. No one's trying to change me. I'm just going to become like a more effective me, you know?
Well, absolutely. And that's one thing I tell people over, because people are like, well, what's the best tendency or the most successful tendency? I'm like, it's not that one tendency is better than the others because they all have strengths and weaknesses. And the strengths are the weaknesses, right? They go together.
Always.
But it's the people who know themselves and they're like, well, I know what I need to succeed, or I know what is likely to trip me up. And therefore, I'm going to set up my circumstances and my schedule and my surroundings in a way that's going to help me achieve my aim. And one of the things that's nice about the tendencies is I think a lot of times people feel very discouraged, or they feel like, why is it that other people can be adults and like I just can't? Like everybody else can just get up and go for a run every morning. Why can't I do that? Like, what's wrong with me? And it's like, oh, a lot of people are in the same boat. There's so many solutions that people have come up with. You do not need to change. This is just a thing. There's good aspects to it. There's bad aspects to it. And now you can focus on like how to move forward to get what you want instead of feeling like there's something wrong with you.
Love that. How to harness. So let's jump into one of these tendencies, the obligers. I hear about this group a lot. I hear about a lot from moms. I have the PTA meeting. I have my kids' soccer practice. I have carpools planned out in my calendar to the wazoo. And forever, I've told myself, one day a week, I want to take a walk around my neighborhood without my kid. Or I want to meet a friend. Like there's something for me. And why can't I do it? And I feel like this might be obliger-esque.
Yes.
So from your framework, like, can you walk through this a little bit, or how have kind of some of the things you figured out could help this person harness their strengths to get what they want?
Yes. So what you described is like exactly what obligers will express. They often say, I can't draw boundaries. I'm really bad at self-care. I come through for other people, but why can't I like take time for myself or whatever it might be? So the key to remember is that you need to create outer accountability even for an inner expectation. So you can't think about self-care or priorities or putting yourself first. You have to think about, well, how can I create outer accountability? So let's say you want to go for a walk in the park. How would you create outer accountability for that? You might go with a friend who will be disappointed if you don't show up. You might take your dog who's going to be really disappointed because it's a highlight of your dog's day. You might think of your duty to your future self. If you come to the end of the year and you haven't been doing this, you're going to be really disappointed with yourself. And maybe you're not going to have those benefits that you would have had in terms of mood regulation, energy, being out in the sunshine, all these things. You might think of your duty to be a role model for someone else. I want to show my children, I want to show the people around me what it looks like to take time for yourself. And if I don't do it, then they're going to think, talk away, but actions are louder than words. And I don't see you doing that. I need to model you talk a lot about modeling behavior. I need to model the behavior that I'm talking about. So in these ways, you create outer accountability, even for an inner expectation. And sometimes obligers feel like it's somehow weak, that they shouldn't like need to rely on outer accountability. I'm like, you're the biggest group. There's a ton of people who need outer accountability. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Just figure out what works for you. Because some people, for some people, taking a class is a really great way to get outer accountability. For some people, that doesn't work. So you really have to tinker it to yourself, but realizing that the outer accountability is what is needed, even for an inner expectation.
You know what? There's two things that come to mind. Number one is there's no morality. There's no morality here. Like there's no better. There's no morality.
No.
Something I say to parents a lot when they're stuck with their kids, and it just made me think of this, is the solution is always in the problem. Right?
Yes.
Like my kid is always saying poop, poop, poop at the table. And I'm like, stop. Well, what if I just told them, let's go to the bathroom and say poop, poop, poop. Feel free. Say it all you want. I'll say it too. And then we'll get that out of our system. Like the solution is in the problem. And what you're saying is if someone's saying, my problem is I can't engage in self-care. Like I'm so good at doing things for other people and bad for myself. Like I love the light bulb of like, wait a second, I just heard what I'm good at. So maybe that's my solution. The impact on my body, whether I take a walk because I've just said, I deserve it. Or I take a walk because I told my friend I wanted to and I made them text me to get it done.
That's great.
The walk is the walk. My body doesn't like feel that different. So it's just a means to an end. And the idea that you're saying like obligers have natural ability, a tendency ability to get certain things done. Let's use that to your benefit.
Absolutely. And, so my type is upholder. That's the one that readily meets outer and inner expectations. And there's pros to that and cons to that. But we often give each other bad advice because we're coming from our own tendencies. So it used to be that obligers would say to me things like, oh, well, now I exercise because I know I need to stay healthy for my kids. And I would be like, well, don't do it for your kids. Do it for you because this is important for you. You don't need to like bring somebody else into it. But I realized that's actually a really good pattern of thinking for obligers. That's really helping them to do something for themselves because they're invoking that outer accountability. So who am I to tell somebody that what they're doing is wrong? It works for them. And so again, it's like, people are often being like, well, you shouldn't do that or you should do that. It's like, well, maybe you should or maybe you shouldn't because you might be coming from a very different place.
I think that's pointing out like a really big blind spot for me too, because reveal, I am also an upholder.
I kind of thought that. I have to say, I suspected that.
You know what? I feel like I have parts of others. I don't have that big of a part of an obliger. I'm going to be honest. That part's not that big. Used to be. But I definitely have a part of me, maybe that's not a rebel, but I definitely have a questioning part of me. But, I was actually talking about with my husband. He's like, that motto, discipline is my freedom. He's like, Becky, that is literally you. Like, that is exactly you, right? So I talk about self-care a lot. And to me, one of the key things our kids need is a parent who feels sturdy. And that to me always involves tapping into our non-caregiver parts. If the only part of us left is caregiving of others, that always gets in our way, ironically, of being a good caregiver because we're so overwhelmed and depleted, et cetera. And one of the things I say a lot is people will say to me, I go out to dinner with my friends because it's really good for my kids to see. And hearing you say this, I think my natural reaction would be like, I'd feel like I need to motivate them. Like, what? Like, you just deserve dinner. Like, you just, but I love what you're saying. That's like very Becky centric. Like, okay, Becky, you're just speaking to yourself. Like, you're not speaking to a mirror. You're speaking to someone different from you, and maybe respect that this is their framework and that's useful. And like, who am I to change that narrative?
Well, and when I was writing about happiness, like I was always struck by people who would just, something that would seem easy to me would be a struggle for them, or they would have a completely different approach to it. And then finally I started to see that there were these patterns. And once you see these patterns, you see them in the office. They're often very obvious with children at a very young age. Like they're really kind of easy to spot once you notice the pattern. And so what's great about that is that then you can harness that in order to achieve an aim, whether for yourself or for somebody else, instead of getting lost in this thing of like, well, one person's right or one person has the better way. It's like, well, we can all learn from each other, but maybe if this doesn't work for you, what are some other ways to try it?
So let's move to kids. Let's, I don't know, your kid is like, why do I have to brush my teeth every night? Why do I have to? Like, I'm knocking at cavities, right?
Yeah.
Like we have these like difficult moments. I'm wondering if kids, if those are questioners, like I want to do what I want to do and you better convince me, or if those are rebels or what, like, let's walk through some like difficult parenting moments with kids in terms of the tendencies.
Yes. So if you have an upholder child, these children are pretty easy, and like they are the ones that are going to be focused on getting their homework on time and like feeding their fish. One thing you will see kind of negative that can be negatives for upholders is they can get like really uptight. Like the teacher says that I have to read for half an hour tonight. And yeah, we went to see grandma and grandpa and it's 11:30 at night, but I need to read because my teacher says I have to. It's hard for them sometimes to understand like when like rules need to be adjusted.
The teacher will never know.
But so you as an adult need to like frame it. But the thing is, you don't want to say things like the teacher will never know.
Exactly.
That's not reassuring to an upholder. An upholder is like, we are respecting like the expectation and say like, the teacher will understand that if you were exhausted, you will not be able to learn in class tomorrow.
Yes.
I promise you that if you ask your teacher what she would think you should do, she would say, get a good night's sleep. And then you'll be, you want to frame it in like what resonates with them. Because a rebel parent might be like, oh, it's great. Like, who cares? Like, let's stick it to the teacher. And it's like to an upholder, they'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't, they can't handle that. And then they can also sometimes be like, it's hard for them to like, if schedules change, they can be rigid, even as children, certainly as adults,
Yes.
I'll say that as an upholder. So for them, they're the ones that are pretty easy to manage in terms of like meeting outer and inner expectations, because that's you want to make sure that they don't sort of get too hard on themselves.
Too rigid and too hard.
Too rigid and too hard on themselves. And you want to give them like a lot of like notice, like this is what's going to happen this weekend. Like they tend to really respond well to that. Questioners need reasons. They need to have a reason for what they're doing. And if they understand the reason, they will get on board. If they don't have a reason, they will not get on board. And a very poignant example I heard of this was a questioner man was telling me how when he was young, he was on the soccer team and he loved soccer. He played goalie and he had a great coach. Then they got a new coach and the coach was like, okay, I have all these, all these drills that everybody's going to do. And this kid went up to him and said, hey, I don't think I should do those drills because I'm a goalie and I have such a different position that I'm playing. And the coach was like, listen, kid, I'm the coach. Everybody does these drills. And the kid quit because he's like, that doesn't make any sense. But if the coach had said to him, hey, I get it. It seems like you really have a different position, but I've studied the training of all the best teams, and they show that accuracy and speed and endurance are important no matter what position you play in. I assure you, this is going to work just as well for you. That kid would have been like, great. All I needed to know was that there was a reason.
Yeah.
Like in a 5-minute conversation. Why do I need to learn the multiplication tables? I can do it on my phone. Why do I need to write a book report? I read the book. If you take the time to explain to that child, they will get on board. If you say things like, because I say so, because everybody does, they won't get on board.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Gretch, this year has gone by so fast.
Yeah.
You and I love thinking about years as a whole. We love thinking about what we want to do in a year, what we want to accomplish. We love looking back on the year. Well, there is still time to have a lot happen in this year. And one thing that can really help when you're trying to tackle something big is therapy. I know that for me, anytime I've struggled or wanted to figure out something big, speaking to a therapist has made a huge difference.
If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time. Take a moment. Visit BetterHelp.com/Gretchen Rubin today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gretchen Rubin.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Is your child struggling with a specific subject or need help with homework? Are they asking questions that you're not sure you can fully answer? IXL Learning is an online learning program for kids. It covers math, language arts, science, and social studies. IXL is designed. This program will improve your kids' grades. Studies done in almost every state in the country. The kids who had IXL are consistently doing better. Powered by advanced algorithms, IXL gives the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. And it doesn't have to eat up all your time. One subscription gets you everything for all the kids in your home, pre-K to 12th grade. So don't miss out. 1 in 4 students in the U.S. are learning with IXL. IXL is used in 95 of the top 100 school districts in the U.S. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/audio. Visit IXL.com/audio to get the most effective learning program out there at the best price.
So I have a big picture question. So we have their kids, they have these different tendencies. And to some degree, just to be effective, always, you have to understand who your kid is and kind of we all flex and learn their language. At the same time, sometimes one of the things I think about for my kids or kids in general is there's a time for that. And to some degree, is it part of our job as a parent? Not just, I don't think it's ever going to be effective to say like, because I said so, but is it some degree our job to loosen the hold of a tendency, to have a little more flexibility? Or do you feel like, no, like this is kind of like who someone is and we have to kind of cater to that?
I mean, I think you want to help them understand how to sort of see past their tendency. But I do think, I mean, judging from the adults and children that I know, this really colors their perspective. It's the way that things make sense to them.
Because like, let's take an upholder. I'm an upholder. Definitely my first kid is an upholder. So I'm thinking about him being the one, let's just say it's him, who's like, I didn't do my reading. Oh my goodness, right? So I know your example. Like another intervention I could see myself saying, and I just really want to know your opinion. You're like, Becky, I really want to do that. It'd be like, you hold yourself to such a high standard and that's like an amazing thing and you respect the assignments and that's so helpful. And it's so hard to like give yourself a little bit of leeway in a moment when there's some extenuating circumstance. That thought of, I have to read is like so loud. It's almost like there's, no other comforting thoughts inside you. I don't know, something like that. I would just kind of like point that out in that way. So instead of completely catering to the tendency, I guess my intervention is more aimed at like kind of like noticing the rigidity of that tendency in the moment. I'm curious what you thought of that.
Well, this is very colored by my own experience as an upholder, but I don't find that comforting when somebody says, oh, well, you should give yourself a break. That actually is like...
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, that's true. You're saying like it's hard. You're just noticing like, oh, you're experiencing the tension of the rigidity.
Like, wow, this feels so important right now. It's so hard to like give yourself a little flexibility right now. I'm really noticing
Well, that's interesting. Well, then that goes to like the emotional acuity, like the understanding of what's happening inside. So I think that's a great, because you're right. It's not a solution. It's just like notice how you're feeling.
Yeah. I'm almost like maybe we're like, noticing, because to some degree, I think what you're saying is like the more aware you are of your tendency, oddly enough, the more open you are to probably other interventions. Because you're like, wow, this tendency really being loud.
Yeah, and you don't think like, oh, this is universal or there's no way out of this. It's like, oh, this is just something that I'm experiencing. And there are other ways that people could be. Yes, I think the self-knowledge thing is really, really key.
So wait, before we go to kids, I'm going to be a little selfish because I feel like I have a lot coming up for me right now. I'm going to share with you. Because one of the things that comes up in my marriage a lot is like if we're going on a trip or something and like, I'm like, okay, well, did you book the car and did you do these things? Like I love to like connect all the dots in my mind.
Yes.
Further in advance.
Yes.
Than my husband does, where he's like, obviously we're going to be fine, right? And this can be a thing between us, like a little bit, because he's like, what? Like, why are you thinking about that? Like, who cares? And I'm like, no, but like, I don't know why I care, but I do. Is that like an upholder tendency?
Upholders tend to really like to plan and to have everything like a to-do list and have a sense that like everything's in order. Yes, which is a strength and a weakness.
Right.
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 Because do you know what your husband is?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. I feel like I have to have him like look at it. I don't want to
Okay,
label him.
Tell him to take the quiz.
You know, exactly. But what, you know, it's so much it's a strength, but it's so funny. My husband is so much more likely to be like, let's go to that restaurant downtown. And I'm like, the one that doesn't take reservations? Like, what if it's like a really long wait? And he's like, I don't know. Like, we'll have a wait. Like, it's going to be a great night. Right. Where like, to me, I'm almost like, that's like that's almost something like I wouldn't even consider doing that, even though I'm like, wait, like when we've done that, it's not like I'm not capable of waiting. And sometimes those nights are super fun.
Yeah, well, in fact, when I was coming up with this framework, which took me months of just like how to spot the patterns, it was really, really hard. But one of the insights for me came from exactly an example like that. A journalist was calling me to talk about like, why can't people be spontaneous these days? Like, why is that? And I said to her, I don't put any value on spontaneity. I don't value it. I don't want to be spontaneous, and I don't seek to be more spontaneous. And she was like, wow. And I was like, who says spontaneity is good? I mean, it's like, I don't like spontaneity. Now, of course, to your point, you want to be flexible. You want to be able to roll with it. You don't want to like close yourself off from life's experiences. But one of the things about an upholder is like, that isn't appealing to them. Whereas with a rebel, spontaneity is really exciting and good. And so if you have a rebel and you're like, oh, let's buy tickets to a concert that's 3 weeks away, that's less exciting to them. But if you're like, hey, you want to come along? I got these concert tickets. It's in 4 hours. They might be like, yeah, I'm in. Because that is exciting to them. Whereas to me, I'm like, oh, can I do something with like a 4 hour like lead time? I'm not sure I can.
I might go to bed 20 minutes later than usual. I don't know. I don't know how that's going to be.
Exactly. That's another upholder thing is the execution. Yeah.
So interesting. Okay. So are there tendencies? I'm just curious. Like, are the tendencies and the percentage of like how they kind of break out in adulthood, is that how everyone starts? Or to some degree, are like more kids are more rebels or more questioners? It's part of their exploration in the world, or not really? Like once you start one way, you kind of stay that way.
Well, I have to say, in my observation, I'm a pretty big believer in the genetic roots of personality. And I do think that your tendency is something that is hardwired, and it's something that you bring into the world. And it's not culture or upbringing or birth order or nationality or anything like that. I mean, I think, and when you know what you're looking for, you do see them in children. It's not always obvious because children aren't autonomous in the way that adults are autonomous, but you can often spot it pretty early if you know. Like I have a child who's an upholder, and I hadn't invented the framework at that point, but if I had, I would have known very early from just the way she behaved. Yeah. It's fascinating though. Many rebels will say that they remembered the moment in childhood when they're like, wow, they can't make me. I mean, somebody was saying like I was putting on my socks as like a little kid struggling to put on my socks. And my mom was like, put on your socks. And I'm like, hey, lady, you can't make me. And it was just like this electrifying realization. So it's interesting. So I do think that they persist throughout our lives.
So it's interesting. Probably what are just day to day, there's no better, but what are some of the more difficult kind of tendencies in terms of parenting, just so parents can almost validate to themselves, yes, this is different than maybe another kid. This is hard.
Well, rebel, I think, is the most misunderstood tendency. It's the one that's the most different from the other three tendencies. And so people often don't understand like how to engage with the rebels in a productive way. It's frustrating for the people who are not rebels, and it's also frustrating for the rebels because they're like, if you would just get out of my way, I could get this done, but like everybody's meddling with me. So
can you give an example? Is this the kid who's like, to me, that my image of this kid is like, they love soccer. They love soccer and they won't get on their shoes to go to soccer. Like meanwhile, like even if it's not even like a thing that they hate, where like, is that something a rebel could even do?
Because if you ask or tell them to do something, or even like encourage them and even praise them for doing something, you ignite the spirit of resistance. And so by saying like, remember, get your shoes on, or your shoes on.
You love soccer. You love it.
You're igniting the spirit of resistance. Whereas if you don't do that and you're just like, okay, we're leaving at 8 a.m. And if we don't leave by 8 a.m., you're going to be late and the coach is going to be mad at you. It's like, are you ready at 8 a.m.? And you might say like 10 minutes to 8, just so that they can track the time. But one of the most kind of memorable examples I heard of a rebel child is, so I have a podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, and sometimes people have questions. And a woman said, I'm an upholder. I have a little kid who's is a rebel. How do I get her to understand that there's some things you just have to do? Like you have to wash your hands after you use the potty. And my answer to her was like, you don't have to wash your hands after you use the potty. You don't. And your little girl has figured this out, and you cannot stand by her side for the next 75 years and make her do it. So you're going to have to help her as a rebel decide that for her own reasons, this is what she wants to do. It's part of her identity. It's part of consequences, whatever. So the interesting thing, though, is she emailed back and she said, oh, that was really helpful to me as an upholder dealing with rebel. But here's how it played out. So this mother and daughter had gone to the mother's grandmother. So this was the little girl's great-grandmother's house, who was very, very frail and had just gotten out of the hospital. And her daughter was running around. And she said, I realized I couldn't say to my daughter, you have to stop running. I can't make her stop running. And so she said to her little girl, great-grandma is so frail. It would be so terrible if she fell or something bad happened to her. She needs her protectors. Can you be one of her protectors? And the little girl said, yes, I can be one of her protectors. And then she was so gentle with her great-grandmother because it went to this idea of identity and choice. This is who this little girl wanted to be. It's what she chose. She was, from freedom and choice, she was choosing to act in a certain way, but just ordering them, it kind of ignites the spirit of resistance. And so that can be really hard as a parent because we spend a lot of times telling our kids what to do.
Yes. And I don't know if one of my kids is full rebel, but, definitely has that. And to me, saying to him, like, I wonder how we can solve this problem. Or like, I wonder if anyone in this room has an idea, is very
That's
different.
Choice.
Right. Exactly. Is choice. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So with rebels, what helps is you give them choice and freedom. So do you want to do it now or later? Do you want this one or that one? Part of it is identity. Oh, you're an animal lover. You're a musician. You're so creative. Like you're an athlete, because then actions follow identity. You can help them as a parent, like lean into an identity, or you give them information, consequences, choice, which is like, if we leave by 8 a.m., you won't get in trouble. If we leave after 8 a.m., you will get in trouble. It's up to you.
Do you feel like those kids, though? Because I feel like those kids, you give them those consequences and they kind of like put their finger up at you. They're like, I don't care. Like, I remember my youngest, like, being like, it was not my proudest moment as parents. Definitely not what I stand for. Not just because I think it doesn't feel good for kids, because I actually think long-term it's not effective. But I remember saying to him, it was something like, I am going to take away all of your stuffed animals if you don't, and it's not like they were comfort objects, but he freaking loved his stuffed animals.
Yeah.
And I will never forget, Gretchen, I think he was 4. He walked into his room, this child, my 3rd child. He opens his closet. I'm witnessing this. He pushes a stool, like a little step stool there, steps on it, takes down a mini suitcase, puts all of his stuffed animals in it, zips it, and wheels it to me. And he goes, here you go. And I was like, I just got played. Oh my goodness, I just got played. And he's like, oh, you want to take away my stuffed animals? I will make that easier for you to show you how much you do not exert any power over me in that way. Right?
That is such a compelling example. Wow. He was 4?
4. I mean, this child, I can't even tell you, is my 3rd. So he gets less. He is just so competent. Like, he doesn't ask for help with anything. He's like, his life story is like, I can figure this out by myself. And he can, in a way that he sometimes like prepares breakfast for his 12-year-old brother, like literally. But at the same time, because that is such a part of his identity, his competence, right?
Yes.
Where like here, to me, even like, I don't like these threats of punishments. Like, I just think there's better ways. But I have found with him, where my older one, my upholder, he's so guilt prone that the threat of, it's not the punishment. He just would be so upset that I'd be disappointed in him, that he'd want to avoid that distress, but not good later on, people pleasing stuff. But, right, like for my youngest, a rebel, like, I don't even think it would work. I've seen it not
But here's
work.
the thing, though. That's the difference between punishments and consequences. So taking away his stuffed animals is a punishment. But a consequence is like, this is just the natural thing that is going to happen. If you are late, you will be in trouble because your coach says everybody has to be there on time.
Got it. Not like I'm making you in trouble. Like, if you get late, your coach might not start. Like, just that's information for you to digest.
Right. It's like, if you don't hand in your book report, then you're going to get a really bad grade. And if you get a really bad grade, then you're not going to be able to like go on the class trip. It's like, and then you can't rescue. You know what I mean? This is the thing where like a lot of times we want to swoop in and at the last minute, like, okay, honey, you can stay up until 10:30 finishing it because I know it's really important. And it's like, no, because you had a week to do it. And part of the assignment was to like, to do it along the way, whatever. So we can't rescue. That's what adult rebels will say. Do not rescue a rebel child. They learn consequences as they happen. And if you protect them from consequences, well, then that works for them great.
And I think that is so right. And this is helping me put so much more context to things that I have figured out with my youngest, like are really helpful. And what's interesting though, Gretchen, is I really do see this softening of that tendency. So that's why I don't know, you and I could have many more discussions of it.
Yes.
I really do feel like what happened at 4, like even that hardening, it's really not there in the same way. He's still him. And I'm obsessed with him because he's going to be a leader one day, right? But one of the lines, especially when he was younger, that always helped. He'd be like, let's say, I don't know, I want to go outside and play in the snow. Okay. And I'm not a big, you have to wear your jacket. I'm like, my kids are independent beings, doesn't matter. But there was a day he was literally in a pair of shorts and he wanted to go in the snow. And I was like, I actually think that's irresponsible, Yeah. And he wanted to go in the snow. Meanwhile, he doesn't have a history of going in the snow in shorts. It was just one of these moments where he felt like I wanted him to put on jacket. So I had this choice. I said something like this, but here's the magic line with him. And then the action. I said, look, sweetie, you can choose. You can choose to not put on your snowsuit and play inside, or you could choose to put it on and play outside. That's it. But then this is the 2 parts. I said, it's totally up to you. And then I'd walk away and not be staring at him.
Yes.
It's something about it's totally up to you and turning my back.
Yes.
I think gave him what he needed to act in line with logic.
Yes. No, and I think that I think a lot of times we intuitively understand, even if we don't have these terms, we start, if with perception and understand, really, and this is what you're saying, really pay attention to your child. You can start to see, this child's going to be too hard on themselves, so I don't want to come down on them because they're going to, lose it. But this other child, I need to set things up in a different way. And, giving them this choice, it's hey, up to you. Some rebels love a challenge. I don't think many 11-year-olds could learn to play that piece of music, but I don't know. You're pretty persistent when there's something you make up your mind you want to do. So we'll see, I'll show them,
That's right. Again, the solution is in the problem.
Exactly.
Love this. All right. Tell me any last thought for right now. I know everyone's listening is be like, I need this book. I need this quiz. Because it really is. I just love the approach of let's figure this out. Let's understand it. Here's a framework. Now, within that framework, let's work with this person, not against. It's just the only thing that could be effective. So I love it. Any last thoughts? Anything else you want to add that I didn't ask about?
I just think that this is a great way to just cut through a lot of just bafflement. It's I don't understand why we're not communicating. And when you understand that somebody just has a different perspective, they're just seeing a situation in a different way, or they need a different kind of situation in which to thrive. It lets us show more compassion to other people and also to ourselves. Because like you say, it's not that one's right and one's wrong, or that you have to think that it's better or worse. It's just you get what you get and you don't get upset. Let's just work with what we have and find a way for everyone to thrive.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. So excited to talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks to Airbnb. Remember, your home could be worth more than you think. Find out more at airbnb.com/host. Thank you for listening. To share a story or ask me a question, go to goodinside.com/podcast. Or you could write me at podcast@goodinside.com. Parenting is the hardest and most important job in the world. And you deserve resources and support so you feel empowered and confident for this very important job you hold. I'm so excited to share Good Inside membership. It's the first platform that brings together content and experts you trust with a global community of like-valued parents. It's game-changing and built for a busy parent who wants to make the most out of the few minutes they have. Good Inside with Dr. Becky is produced by Jesse Baker and Eric Newsom at Magnificent Noise. Our production staff includes Sabrina Farhi, Julia Knapp, and Kristen Muller. I would also like to thank Erica Belsky, Mary Panico, Brooke Zant, and the rest of the Good Inside team. And one last thing before I let you go. Let's end by placing our hands on our hearts and reminding ourselves, even as I struggle and even as I have a hard time on the outside, I remain good inside.
I love that conversation, and I love knowing that the 4 Tendencies framework resonates with Dr. Becky and so many parents.
For more with Dr. Becky, check out her podcast, Good Inside with Dr. Becky, anywhere you find your podcasts. Bye, Gretch.
Bye, Elizabeth. The best time to start a happiness project is 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Gretch, have you ever heard of a family that has all 4 tendencies?
Yes, I've heard of several families that have all 4 tendencies, and I've also heard of a few families that are all 1 tendency, both of which I think would be a challenge in their own ways.
I want to meet the all rebel family.
Yeah, well, and I talked to an all upholder family. That would also be quite intense. From the Onward Project.